Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review In the Mouth of Madness. So, this, of course, is to be a very interesting film, and I think a lot of people would go on and say that this movie is to be kind of too weird or kind of too whatever. Like, to me, this kind of very much reminds me of, like, Evil Dead, or really, this movie is to just be so fascinating just by the cast list alone. Just going on and on, you just have like Hayden Christensen is in this movie as this like very young paper boy. I'm like, oh my god, that was Hayden Christensen in this movie? The same guy who was in the Star Wars prequels? Like, this is like little kid, young Hayden Christensen going and dropping off this, and I didn't even realize it. We also have freaking Charles Heston in this movie. We have Wilhelm von Humberg, who a lot of people will probably know him most as the Ghostbusters 2 villain, the Vigo the Carpathian. And I'm like, oh my god, this movie is just like, it goes on and on. Freaking John Glover from Smallville as he's kind of top villain in this film. Man, we just go on and on with all these characters. And even the small roles, like, we go on and we find out, like, man, like, even the small roles are really good actors that went on to do amazing things at some point. And it's so interesting going through this movie. So, Into the Mouth of Madness. We have this, of course, be a John Carpenter film, and this is probably another one of those where people don't even realize that this is another John Carpenter film. Supposedly, this is to be John Carpenter's Apocalypse freaking movie, because I guess we have this movie, we have Thing and The Thing, and then we also have supposedly some movie called Prince of Darkness. Sure. I watched the trailer of that and I'm like, oh, I don't get it. But I ended up getting this film, and the funny thing, the origin story about me wanting to see this film for a very long stretch of time. There was one time that this movie was to come on late at night, one time on TV. I ended up just getting a glimpse of it, and the glimpse that I had gotten is we had Sam Neill, who goes on and plays John Trent in this movie. And so this guy was running down this tunnel with all these monster walls of monster things behind him. And that was my introduction to this movie. And I was like, what the is this scene? What's going on here? As if this is like weirdly, like almost kind of like Jacob's Ladder, or like the movie House at some point, if you guys have ever seen the horror movie House. So, the reason why this seems like Evil Dead to me is we go on and find out that we have and I'm going to kind of tee this up here. We have and I'm going to show, and I'm going to tell you guys where, of course, you can go and see this movie also. But we have an author named Sutter Kane that is to go on and make a number of these books. And so it seems that all of a sudden people are to start to go crazy via these books. And I guess people are starting to get their minds warped via reading these stories. And so all of a sudden we have it to where people are starting to wreak havoc. And so John Trent is to be this insurance investigator that's trying to figure out where the heck Sutter Kane is. And that this all may be some kind of hoax or something like that. Not quite sure how exactly we have an insurance investigator that is like smack dab in the middle of all this. You would think they would just have gotten a detective. Like, I don't know how an insurance investigator like needs to go on and do a case like this. It just seems kind of odd to me. But we have Sutter Kane's books coming out to be some kind of riddle, some kind of hidden thing, and John Trent is to be the only one who figures it out, goes to a certain location, and is to go on and figure out that basically the whole world is pretty much effed at this point. That there's nothing that John Trent can do but just go on and just like realize the world is coming to an end, and he's just gonna go on and just sit down and just laugh as it all is to roll credits because that's all he can do at this point. So, so I think a very underrated movie, and I think people need to marinate on this film, especially if you like a movie like Evil Dead. Like, this is kind of to be a very meta like movie, and that's the thing that I can enjoy or like about it. Uh, Really, there also is some interesting scares in this movie, but I think it's really more like I would call it a much more uncomfortable movie. Like if you're going like ooh, like maybe this movie will be for you, a person that likes to go ooh a lot. Like this movie may be more unsettling, so to speak. So with that said, I think it's about that customary time to go into that double five time territory. Where can you go on and see this thing called a film? Uh, and what would be my grading system for this film? I would say that this film is a very interesting movie. I would say uh, this is a really good film, like a really good film, like a solid good film, and because it's very interesting, it's visually fascinating, and and I don't know if I could go on and like muster the word great when talking about this film, simply because I don't know. Like, there's something where you're just like, man, I want to marinate a little bit more on what's going on here, like, because it feels like this movie, in all honesty, is just too short. I feel like I would love for this to be some kind of series or like show or something. Like I wish they could have gone on and done that to just kind of give me more to understand, or I wish there could have been like this slow progression of a like a build up of a kind of thing that only a show could really provide me. So yeah, interesting. I enjoyed it. Uh, it's a good enough film or a solid good film. But it just takes some time for you to just get what the story is, and you're like, yeah, I find this to be fascinating. So, where can you go on and find this? Well, if you go onto Google, there'll just be a bunch of apps you would have to go and pay your way to say that you've seen this movie. If that's what you want to do, by golly, go ahead and do it. You can go onto YouTube or a certain number of things and pay. Like I think right now the going price for this movie is like $2.99, so that might be a decent price for some people. So where can you go and get it for free? Because I know everybody would like that option. So the one app that I can conveniently find that again is to be able to have let me see this film, I went on to a Google Play Store and I searched the word TV Crush, and hopefully that's still on the Google Play Store. If not, I would suggest Google searching this app. But TV Crush, you can download that app and be able to dare in fact watch this movie. Uh, Really, for that app, like I get that a lot of people kind of get annoyed with the fact that like every time you're like clicking something, you get an ad pop up, but eventually you'll get into the movie, you'll be able to see the film. So with that said, I think it's about that time to just go into that double five time territory. Let's go on and spoil this film because it's about time to say that we've seen it. So let's go into spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So in the very beginning of this piece, we start out like it's kind of a very interesting beginning because like we have to show where the character is and then go on and then like start from the beginning and then push on. So we have John Trent, Sam Neill, who is being taken uh, to a mental hospital to, of course, be ushered in by John Glover, who is Saperstein, or Saperstein, I believe is how his name is pronounced in this film. So we have John Trent, who is to be ushered in as he's going and trying to fight his way out of being brought to this mental hospital. Trent goes on and is to kick some guy in the nuts, and then all of a sudden he gets overpowered and he gets shoved into this room. We have John, who is to apologize to the guy that he kicked in the nuts because it was just a lucky shot. So John is now forced to be in this room where he's waiting on his doctor to go on and analyze him. So we have a doctor coming in called Dr. Wren. A lot of people know David Warner, of course, from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, Secret of the Ooze. That's, like, he's done a lot of other stuff, but immediately, like, what quickly pops into mind is, hey, it's the TGRI guy. Or the TCRI guy. The guy from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So we go on and we have Dr. Wren, who is to come in to talk to John Trent. And we have it where John Trent, the only thing he was to ask for that Saperstein was to say that John asked for was a black crayon. Like, okay. So Dr. Wren goes into this room to find out that John had went on to draw crosses all over this room and crosses all over his face, because John at some point was to come right into this room, and at some point we have it to where monsters are like appearing upon his brain, and so John is going to put crosses all over this room, like as if this is some Conjuring movie. And so we have Dr. Wren coming into this room. It's like, well, hey, like, kind of love what you did with the place. Like, the cross is really, like, do something for the room. Kind of, like, goofy kind of thing. So, John is, like, and I'm paraphrasing here. We're gonna get through this here. So, John Trent is, of course, saying, like, oh, since you're a doctor, like, I'm sure you're here to ask me about them. Dr. Wren's like, huh? What are you talking about? John is to, of course, say, it's like, well, for a crazy person, there is always a them, there's a they, there's a, of course, group of some sort, or a thing of some sort, that there's a reason why John is to be here. And so John is going to go on to tell Dr. Wren what exactly is the them, the they, the thing that is to bring him here. So, starting off, John is to mention about a guy named Sutter Kane that is to go missing. But we back up a little bit further than that. So, we have John Trent going and talking to Mr. Paul, who of course is to be John Trent's investigation. So we have John and we have Robinson, who Robinson is, I guess, John Trent's boss, and he's kind of seeing over this. So we have a room that I guess is far too hot for some ungodly reason. And like this reminds me of like Ghostbusters 2, where we had Egon who consistently rises the heat on the two married couple to make them more and more just angry, upset, or aggravated, or whatever. And so we have one point where like John is even complaining about the heat, and he's like, "Hey, Mr. Paul, like, do you want me to go and turn on the air conditioner?" And even though like they're complaining about the heat, but Mr. Paul is like, "No, I think I'm fine, even though I'm sweating to death." So we have it where like Mr. Paul is just kind of sweating it, and so Trent goes on and is to say to Mr. Paul that that John thinks that Mr. Paul is to try to scam people out of money because Mr. Paul was to have a wife that was to have certain items that were to supposedly burn in some fire. But then also John turns around and says, "But wait a minute, but it seems that you have another woman off to the side that is to also have the exact same things of clothing that your wife was to also have that had supposedly burnt in this fire." And so the interesting thing is that Mr. Paul was to be in cahoots with his wife, but since his wife found out about his affair, all of a sudden Mr. Paul's wife had come clean, and so Mr. Paul had just scammed these people out of money from this fire. So after that whole thing had been resolved, and this investigator is going on and they're like, "Yeah, like I beat this case," and so on and so forth. So both Robinson and Trent are going on to this restaurant where they're going, and they're getting food, and so all of a sudden they're going on and talking about the next case that they're going to go on and try to do. So they're going to go on and look for Sutter Kane, which is to be this author that I guess had disappeared. So we have John Trent that I guess is to mention that this, like the latest book of Sutter Kane, I guess is going to get put out soon, and there's a line of people that are all wanting to go on and get this book. Sadly enough, I guess maybe the author was going to do some signing, but like sadly didn't show. So all of a sudden we have this guy that comes crashing through this window, and we actually end up finding out that, and they just call this guy the Axe Maniac. And so all of a sudden this guy comes crashing through this window. Robinson is kind of out of the picture here. And so John Trent is kind of like holding at this table. We have this Axe Maniac who goes and turns to John Trent and mentions like, "Have you ever read a Sutter Kane book?" I'm like, "What the fuck?" He's like, "Have you ever read a Sutter Kane book?" And so the guy's like, "No." So we go on and we have this guy who is almost going to swing this axe, for all of a sudden these police officers to go and shoot him down and kill him. And so we're like, oh my god, this is weird. I'm interested. Uh so we go on and we have John Trent, who is to go and meet with the publishers of Sutter Kane's books. And so it seems that these books are to be massive sellers, to the point when I guess when there isn't a book that comes out, there's a lot of these book readers that are to be restless and so on and so forth. So, because we have at some point where Sutter Kane is to mention that his books are to sell more often than I guess the Bible, and that there had been a number of different languages translated to go on and continue to just sell all of these books. So John Trent goes to these publishers, and of course that's when we get Charlton Heston, which is Jackson Harglow, and we go and we also go on and meet another publisher called Linda Stiles, which of course Stiles will like. It's very rare for us to see a name called Styles unless it's AJ Styles from WWE. But yeah, Linda will be basically John Trent's sidekick for this movie, and also, well, I say sidekick, but that seems really flimsy. Like I want to say that like she's basically like side by side trying to figure this whole thing out with Trent, and that seems more like sidekick sounds weird. So, because we have it where Jackson, who is Charlton Heston's guy, who's thinking like, well, if anything, like we really need this author to be found somehow or another. And they also find out that I guess the guy who is to be murdered, who had that axe in the early part of the film, was actually none other than Kane's agent. It's like, oh, okay, so like I can understand why that guy's freaking brain got warped, because I'm sure if anything, like he is to go on and be more part of like the reading of the books and whatever and so on and so forth. So pushing on. So Trent and Linda are trying to figure out like, okay, like where is Sutter Kane? Like what can we do to find him? So John Trent just decides to go on and pick up these books and start to read them to understand this author. So all of a sudden we have one kid who's going on and is walking by John Trent and saying like, we continue having these people say that like it can see you, or like and so on and so forth. And so John is just kind of weirded out by that, but he's like, okay, whatever that means. So Trent goes on and is to take these books, and he's starting to read them. And we have Trent going on, and I think he's calling his superior. And Trent is going on reading these books, trying to figure out this author. And Trent's mentioning that it feels like all these books are, they kind of feel very like realistic, or they kind of feel like surreal or whatever. And so all of a sudden we go on and have Trent, who of course is to, at one point in this film, go and walk down this dark alley where he sees these posters of this book. And so John goes on and is to see this little flap of this poster, And then he walks down and sees this dark alley where he sees this police officer beating this man. And the police officer just kind of turns like, "Hey, you want any of this, buddy?" And then John just kind of walks off. So John now is dreaming, and so he again goes down this same alley, and we of course now have this police officer who has a very differently changed face as it looks more monsterish. And all of a sudden, we go on and have a number of people that are all to be kind of, their face is kind of like all like bloodied eyes or kind of changed in some way, to now go on and have all these people with these axes go after this police officer and go and chop him down. Trent is very like weirded out by this, and so he goes on and is to of course just wake up, and he's back on his couch. He's like, oh, like, all right, so this is just a really weird dream. All of a sudden, John is to realize that the police officer, the infected police officer, is still on his couch, and then Trent wakes up again, and he's like, "Oh my god!" He's waking up and he's like sweating, and just like we're gonna have this character just getting through so many nightmares, so much so that he's like sweating from his nightmares. So Trent, after going on and having every single one of these books right in front of him, we have Trent realize something. So he takes these scissors and he starts cutting every single cover of every single one of these books and puts every single piece together, and realize that this this of course thing is to present something. It's to present some image. So Trent goes on and is to take this to Harglow and Styles, and we have Trent who is to showcase that all these things are to present New Hampshire, and that I guess there is to be a scavenger hunt for someone to go on and find Hobbs End. And that I guess if they go and they find Hobbs End, that they're going to get some lavish prize at the end of all this. And so that's what Trent is thinking that these guys are trying to do. Some weird, goofy scavenger hunt. And so this still isn't to be like legitimate, like this guy is really missing. They're still just trying to do some kind of thing to like swindle the people, and they're like, no, like this is all legitimate. Like we like this still isn't some kind of like riddle or puzzle or whatever. And Trent's like, sure. So we now go on and have both Styles and Trent needing to go on to find where the heck Hobbs End is. And so they're driving all the way through New Hampshire, trying to figure out this puzzle, trying to figure out what this is. And so both Trent and Styles keep changing between like who's going to drive, so on and so forth. So all of a sudden Styles is going on and seeing this kid on this bike, and we have this kid on this bike with these playing cards that kind of like hit the tires consistently, and or the bike piece consistently, with this thing being on the tires. So Styles all of a sudden is to see this like now much more older looking man driving this or riding this bicycle. It's like, okay, that looks a little weird. All right. So all of a sudden, Styles, now the same old man, is now like smashing into this car. And so both Trent and Styles are to stop to see if this person's okay. And this person is to mention that uh, like they can't get out, like they'll never get out. And so all of a sudden the person gets back up and then is riding their bike again like nothing happened. And Trent is going and telling Styles, is like, well, was that person ever really hurt or like what? Like, because with this guy being an insurance person, like I'm sure it's like, yeah, I don't like want somebody going and saying that we did like a hit and run or something like that. So Trent's going on and saying to Styles that, hey, like, once we get to the next town, we'll report it. So that way we'll, like, at least that'll be a thing. So Styles is continuing to drive as Trent is sleeping. And so all of a sudden, Styles is starting to see things and is all of a sudden going on and continuing to drive uh, through this one like bridge that of course is to be like this indoor bridge of a thing where there's like a uh, where there's like a top to it and like there's like kind of pieces all around this bridge where you can kind of see some gaps of sunlight and so on and so forth. So this kind of feels like if you've ever seen any number of those movies where it's like the town that you bizarrely, once you enter into, like you can never get out of. It's kind of like the Bermuda Triangle, but I don't know about the Bermuda Triangle because I think at some points there's sometimes for some stories you could get out of the Bermuda Triangle. Depends, I guess. So both Trent and Styles are making their way through this bridge to get to Hobbs End, and Trent is telling Styles, is like, "Oh, hey, you found it!" As he wakes up. We had the one moment where Styles, uh, realizing, or we had Trent who realizes Styles was sleeping while he was driving, and so Trent goes on and is to open his glove compartment and takes his horn out. And I'm like, why wouldn't Trent just lay on his horn that he already has? But no, Trent specifically gets out this one horn and he's like, hee hee. And like Styles wakes up and he's like, oh, were you sleeping? Kind of. Oh, like, hey, like being a dick. So we have Styles who's telling Trent, it's like, well, hey, you can drive now. Let's switch places. Because Styles, who is just kind of like so like out of her element here, not realizing how exactly they got to this point and how they got here, and I guess they really just, if they believed in it enough that it just came true kind of thing, because it doesn't make sense other than that. So they get to this town and they are to make it to, I guess, this bed and breakfast, this kind of a like hotel-ish like place. So we go on and we have both Trent and Styles who are kind of baffled at this painting throughout the whole entire film, where all of a sudden this painting seems to continue to move. A painting that is to consistently move. I wonder where that feels familiar. Season of Evil. Yeah. Season of Evil, that's for sure. Ghostbusters 2. Anyways, so because every time Styles is to look at this picture, she consistently sees that it's moving. The group, the couple inside of it just keeps on moving, and she's so like, oh my god. So we have it where Styles is to have this town seem to be just like the books that she has read. Styles goes on and is to go and see a group of kids that are all supposedly rushing to her at some part of this town, and all of a sudden they vanish. It's like, okay, that's a little weird. There is also to be a dog that just kind of runs through parts of this town and so on and so forth. Very weird, very bizarre. So we go on further into this story, and so both Trent and both Styles are immediately thinking that every single bit and piece of this town is to be just like the book. And so Trent is trying to say here, it's like, well, no, I think you're wrong. And so Trent is saying that there is to be this church that is to, of course, have the these kind of like black things with like gold tips, like onion gold tips on the end of this part of this church. And like, I'm not doing the description of the church justice here, but so we have Trent open this one window thinking he's going to see this church right in front of him, and instead he sees this awful looking barn. And so Styles is like, well, like, you're looking through the wrong window. So Styles opens this one other window up and is to, of course, see this church. Like, aha! I got you. So here is the weird, goofy thing. So this old woman who is Miss Pickman, we find out weirdly that Mrs. Pickman is to have her husband cuffed to her. And at some point, this old man is like, arr, arr, and we have Miss Pickman that's like, shut up, shush, as he's being cuffed to this woman. And then later on in the film, I guess we have Miss Pickman who's going and tearing through her husband and murdering him. It's what we kind of see off in the distance as John Trent is just kind of running around, hustling and bustling and whatever, trying to go through this town and figure out what the heck is going on. As Trent is calling for Miss Pickman, and Miss Pickman, of course, is just consuming her husband, I'm assuming. Doing something with him, just tearing him apart, not quite sure. But anyways, so we go on and have both Trent and Styles making their way to this church because they really want to go on and see what the good word is for today. So all of a sudden we have a bunch of kind of townspeople that is to be led by Simon, who of course a lot of people know him as Vigo the Carpathian from Ghostbusters 2, and of course one of the henchmen from Die Hard, if you've seen that original movie. We have Simon coming in, and I was like, man, this is so awesome. Like, this cast, this movie is so great, unbelievably great. Just little tiny characters and stuff like that. But anyways, so Simon is to make his way to this church with these guns from all these people, and they're wanting to come and make it into this church because I guess there is to be some kid there that's at this church. And so all of a sudden we start to see this kid, and these doors swing open, but then they start to open and close, open and close. All of a sudden we see Sutter Kane, and so Sutter Kane is talking to Simon, And then so all of a sudden Sutter Kane is releasing all these dogs. And so all these dogs are going and attacking these guys as they're falling over. I'm like, oh, I'm falling over. We know. We know that you're going to falling over. They knew I'd fall over. We definitely knew. Yeah, you knew. I get it. So of course, in every single horror film, we always have it to where someone is gonna freaking just clumsily fall over, because heaven forbid. So, so we go on and we have these guys who are scrambling just to get out of here, and so Trent and Sal's are watching on as everything is to unfold here, and so at some point we go on and have our characters eventually trying to make it to the church. Because, of course, they're wanting to figure all of this out, so on and so forth. So, we. So we have it where slowly but surely people are also starting to lose their minds in this town. Uh, but it's kind of interesting when both Trent and Styles go and make it into this town and it seems very deserted, that as if like there's a whole like town here but there's no one in it. So we go on, and so Styles eventually is going to make it to this church to talk to Sutter Kane, because Styles is to immediately think that since these books are to help them kind of figure out things, as Trent is going on and reading some description part of this book, it seems that Styles is naturally assuming that the brand new book is going to help them figure out things, because Kane had come here, I guess, specifically to write this brand new book. So Styles thinks that all of this will be answered when they meet up with Sutter here and get him to give them the new book. And Trent is like, I don't know about all this. So we go on and we have Trent, who's just thinking that this is all just a goose hunt or just a chase for no good reason. So Styles is to go on and make it to this church once we get further and further into this film. So Trent goes on and is to meet with Sutter Kane in this church while he's finishing up this book called Into the Mouth of Madness. We also had at one point where, speaking of that title, Trent was going on and smoking a cigarette, and Styles wanted him to put it out, and he puts it out in a mug that, of course, is to say, like, Sutter Kane Into the Mouth of Madness, and Trent's like, really? Like, guys have mugs of this? Like, really? This is garbage. Of a book that technically hasn't even come out yet. And immediately once the book comes out, also weirdly the movie comes out at the exact same time. Of a brand new book that makes no sense. That actually does not work, because you can't do that at the same time. Hence why you'd have a lot of books after the fact that go on and is to become a movie or a show or some kind of something, because like it's basically like a play that does really well in the theater. You can't have it all of a sudden just turn around and become a movie. There has to be some marination of time, and then it can be adapted somewhere. Hence why you get a number of stuff that is taken from something that took a number of years or a year or something like that, and then they're like, oh, okay, let's hand it off to be adapted. But that's just me. So and again, that's also just John Carpenter and wanting to just speed things up because justifyingly so. Anyways, so so we have it where Styles is talking to Kane, and Kane is mentioning that he can only hold off these monsters for so long because we have this door that seems to be kind of like pressing back and forth as if it's like bubbling up, as if you would go on and see like when you have water that is getting far too hot, like it kind of looks like that door is like this, where you kind of see like these like little kind of like back and forth like pressing or pushing or whatever when you kind of get food that's a little too hot, so it's like this back and forth kind of thing with this door, with something just kind of pressing to get out. So Kane is to go on and is to now want to show Styles his book. And so he grabs her and then shoves her eyes right at the title page of this book. And then all of a sudden, once Styles is to see the title page of this book, her eyes start to bleed. And so all of a sudden, weirdly, we see that Kane is to have this, like the backside of his body has weirdly this monster, this demon, this whatever. And so we have it where I guess since now Styles is going to slowly but surely become this monstrous thing herself, slowly but surely, because now she has been infected by Kane's book, by reading it. We go on and have Styles, who is not only touching Kane, but then touching the monster that is to be from his backside, entire backside. So we have Styles making her way back to Trent. And basically, Styles is now a lost cause. Styles is basically on Trent's or on Kane's side. And so, plus, we have Styles who's just really going to be slowly but surely become this big, huge rage monster at some point. Or just monster nonetheless. To where Trent, instead of having this being like, oh, I should rescue the damsel in distress and so on and so forth, instead we just have it where Trent is like, dude, I guess I'm just going to save myself. Just try to get the heck out of this town and so on and so forth. So Trent goes on and is with Styles, and Styles is wanting to kiss up all up on Trent, and like she's going on, and to the point where Trent is to now have to kind of like grab her and to kind of toss her on this bed because it feels like Styles is possibly sick of some kind. So, which is really just to say that she's infected. So Trent is going on and trying to make it to Miss Pickman, and of course Miss Pickman is to be gone, and Trent is to look at this picture again to see that this picture is wildly different, that I guess instead of two people, we go on and see two monstrous beings. And so Trent goes on, and after kind of going through this hotel where we kind of see Miss Pickman who's devouring her husband, we of course have Trent make it out of this hotel to see this monstrous being, which forces Trent to be like, dude, I'm gonna get the out of here. So Trent goes into his car and he is now like driving away like a crazy man, just wanting to figure out how he can get out of this town. And so we have at some point where Trent is going on and meeting up with Simon at this bar, and Trent is going on and having a beer because he's like, God, like, man, you guys know how to put on a show. Like you guys and your special effects and all this and that. And so Simon's like, I don't know what you're talking about, but like that's like it's not a show. So we have later on where Trent again is to go back into the same bar and have it where Simon is a lot more disheveled and is to go on and like be more like scraped and scarred and whatever. And so Simon is going and pulling the trigger of the shotgun to murder himself because we have it where Kane is to tell him to. And so Simon needs to go and shoot himself because he's basically ordered by Kane because he's written that way. So we have every single character Sutter Kane is controlling because it is to have been written that way. So Kane is technically controlling all of this now because he has written this story. And so all of a sudden, Sutter Kane is to all of a sudden become God now, or a godlike like being in the story, because he is to write everything. And so I'm like, wow, that's like a fascinating way to approach all this. And like we have an author who basically is God. Interesting. Because technically that is true. Because in all actuality, we have it where an author can play God to have a person, character, or whatever, who's kind of hanging in the balance. So there's a lot of meta things going on in this story. So Trent is going off and trying to get out of this town. He consistently tries to go and find an exit, find a road to get out here. And every single time he goes right into this road where all these villagers are kind of having all these axes and like, "Mah, yeah, yeah." And so everywhere Trent goes and tries to get out of this town, every single time, the road is to turn orange, and Trent is to go right back to the middle part of that town, and there's nothing he can do. So Trent just decides, well, like instead of going and trying to find all these other roads, I am instead going to go on and just drive through all of these people. So Trent drives through all of these people and then is to crash his car because Trent was going to go on and drive away with Styles to try to get the heck out of here. But when he was going and trying to get the keys, which Styles was to go on and have, Styles goes on and eats the keys and swallows the keys. And so now Trent is to go and take the screwdriver and rip this kind of ignition off, this key ignition off, so he can go and start the car via the screwdriver. So Trent is driving, and so he's driving through these people, crashing his car, and so because we of course have at one moment where Styles is trying to kiss on Trent, and to the point of Trent getting distracted and not being able to drive this car anymore, and so hence why he crashes this car. So we now have it where we have this really cool visual where Styles is to all of a sudden become this like what is the perfect word to say this? A person who is to go and kind of spider walk themselves. If you've ever seen, here's a wrestler reference for you. There was this guy known as Bray Wyatt who used to work for the WWE, and eventually he'll probably work somewhere else because it's only a matter of time. So we had this WWE wrestler who was to go to this turnbuckle and then was to go on and turn his body to where he's kind of like spider walking to his opponent, which always kind of freaked everybody out. So we have it where, of course, Styles is doing the exact same thing, kind of walking on all fours, technically, making her way to Trent. And so we have Styles who continues to contort her body to where we can kind of just see her head kind of doing these kind of goofy and odd like things. So Trent is like, I'm getting off out of here any way that I possibly can. So really what is to be forced to be happening here is that Trent is to be forced to go back to this church. Because, of course, we're going to have it where of course, Kane is to talk to Trent. Because what, of course, is to happen is I think Trent is to get knocked unconscious, and they kind of just drag him back to this church. So Trent is now in this confessional talking to Kane, and Kane is mentioning how like his books are kind of everywhere, and that a number of languages has been translated for people to go on and read this book, so on and so forth. So we have it where Trent is to go and tell Kane that his books suck. And so we go on and we have Kane going on and pressing Trent against this part of this confessional wall. And so all of a sudden he is now back where Styles was at one point going to read, of course, a part of Kane's book. But really, Trent doesn't get the same fate. So Kane is going and telling Trent that Trent is to be also part of Kane's book, and that Trent's mission is for him to go on and take this book and have it be published to the masses. And Trent's like, well, hey, you can't control me. Like, I'm not a puppet in your story. And Kane's like, well, like, everyone is. You all are. Sorry. So we now have Kane that is telling Trent that he can no longer stop these monsters from coming. And so all of a sudden we have, of course, Kane that is to tear himself up, like, of course, you are to tear a page from some book, but kind of do it in a very kind of like an opening kind of way, where it kind of is to be this kind of like sun kind of like rip. So like as if you are to like puncture a hole into a piece of paper and like and open it that way. So all of a sudden we have Styles who is going on and reading a part of this book and having Trent basically do the things that this girl is saying from this brand new book. So Trent is going on and looking into this hole to see what exactly he can see here, but then all of a sudden he's to realize that these monsters are slowly but surely going to come through this opening, and that Trent is going to have to go on and forcibly take this book and run through this tunnel to make it out of here. So Trent is all of a sudden to be forced to take this book, because this book is kind of like The Mask in some kind of ways. If guys have ever seen the Jim Carrey movie The Mask, where we have at some point where Jim's character Stanley Ipkiss was trying to get rid of the mask, like try and fling the mask away or try to do any number of things to try to get rid of it. And every time Ipkiss would try to get rid of the mask, all of a sudden the mask would reappear again. So we have it like that. So Trent all of a sudden is running through this tunnel with these monsters coming behind him. He's like running. He's like, so Trent all of a sudden is to trip, and he's going on, and he's like holding himself. He's like, I'm gonna die. They're gonna eat me. Whatever. So all of a sudden, Trent is to be at this like four-cornered crossroad kind of thing, and he's like, oh my god, like was that all a dream? What happened? What's going on? So all of a sudden we have Hayden Christensen coming in, and he of course is playing this paperboy, and so we have Trent going on and telling this paperboy, it's like, hey, like, do you know what Hobbs End is? It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, hey, do you want a paper? And the guy's like, no. So we now go on and have it where Trent is to make it all the way to this this motel. I don't know I never knew the difference between a hotel and a motel. Is there legitimately a difference? Is it just one word to be a real difference? I never knew what the huge massive difference of that was. Like I would just go and say everything is to be a motel hotel because I never knew what the lingo was or why anything had to be goofily different. But it is what it is. So Trent gets to be in this new motel, and Trent was to leave this book in the middle of that road, and then he walks off. All of a sudden, we have this. We have Trent going and trying to get this newspaper, and the motel owner is to say, "Hey, yeah, like you have a package for you," and Trent's like, "I don't know how anybody would give me a package because no one is to really know I'm here." So I was like, "Well, I don't know, but here you go, has your name on it." So Trent all of a sudden is to open this package to realize it's the book again, and so Trent goes on and is to chuck this book into the sink and burn it. So we also had Trent who's asking this guy who was to come with this book, and both the two men that were working for this hotel or this motel were to go on and mention, it's like, well, yeah, we didn't see anybody. This just appeared. So Trent, now after burning this book, is to go and try to seek bus fare to get back home. And so Trent is going on and sleeping on this bus. And so all of a sudden, we have it where Trent is again sleeping. All of a sudden, we now have it where Kane is now like talking to Trent here. And so Trent is going on and of course having Kane mentioning that he's God now and he can kind of do whatever he wants. And so Kane still wants Trent to do what he told him to do. So Trent is to, of course, wake up and everything is supposedly blue because Kane's favorite color is blue. So he's like, okay, this is a little weird. So Trent wakes up again screaming And all the people on the bus are like, hey man, cool out. Like, hey man, you're awake. Like, everything's fine, as he's like pelted with sweat yet again. So Trent finally makes it all the way back to, of course, this book publisher, who, of course, is Jackson Harlow as Charlton Heston. So we have Trent going and talking to Jackson, and it seems that all of a sudden Jackson is to not understand what Trent is telling him. Because Trent goes on and is to tell Harlow this whole entire story of what happened to him. And Harlow's like, well, that's a little bit weird because I've never heard of a girl named Linda Stiles. How do you explain that? And Trent is like, well, Kane must have just written her out, making it so that she doesn't exist. So Harlow's like, okay, that's weird. And also, Harlow mentions to Trent that, like, that the book that Trent was supposed to give to Harlow now has technically already been put out and published like a month or so ago, and that they already have like the final thing of it. And so Trent is like, oh my god, like, whatever you guys do, just burn these books. We have Trent who asks Harlow, it's like, well, have you read the book yet? And Harlow's like, I've never had the stomach to read any of his books. So we have like a certain selective amount of people that I guess, luckily, if they haven't read it, or Harlow is to also mention that a movie is coming out soon of this whole thing, that either one way or the other, people are going to go on and be able to see or read or whatever the story. So all of a sudden, Trent is to go on and fall back out of this chair and just make his way out of here. So we of course have Trent, who is to be by this bookstore and waiting as one person is to go out after they read this book. And so Trent is going on and telling this book reader, hey, did you just read the latest Sutter Kane book? He's like, yeah. And he's like, how is it? It's like, oh, it's amazing. And so we go on and we have of course Trent mentioning, it's like, well, this won't be coming as much as a surprise to you. And so all of a sudden we have Trent who whips out this axe and is to go and kill this man, and that's what pushes him on to go to this mental hospital where he goes on and meets with Dr. Wren. And so we now have it to where this comes full circle to now have Dr. Wren hearing this whole story play out. And so all of a sudden Dr. Wren is realizing that like, yeah, I guess it seems that Trent is to kind of supposedly figure out how this whole pandemic had started. And that all it took was to have a bunch of people all read this book and to get frickin' manipulated by it or whatever, changed by it forever. Going on it, like, there's a lot of people who go on and say that they are to read a book and it technically had changed their life. Well, in this story, we have it to where, of course, a book is to really change somebody's life because it turns them into a big, huge rage monster. So all of a sudden, Dr. Wren is to also mention that he's not going to be reading this book because luckily he never did. So we go on and we have Trent, who is kind of waiting things out because he's like, dude, I'm just gonna stay in this room because I know everything is just gonna go on and be chaos outside of this door, so to speak. So all of a sudden, Trent is hearing some craziness as this mental hospital is to tear itself apart. So Trent all of a sudden is to have his door kind of broken open. So Trent is all of a sudden like, well, I guess since my door is open anyways, Trent's like going on and like, hey, like, it looks like this place is in shambles. So he starts going through the mental hospital, just kind of checking on things. We don't see the fate of John Glover. We don't see what happened to Saperstein. I wanted to have either seen him dead somewhere, or maybe to hopefully feel that he's still alive. And if there were to ever make a sequel of this movie, which they could technically still do, but I don't know. Like, that would be really cool to have it be all like, what if they did a sequel that you never knew was a sequel and they just tied this movie in, and for a lot of people who are actually just fans of it anyways are like, oh my god, this is tying into the Mouth of Madness, and they didn't even realize it. So all of a sudden we have it where Trent is just decide that I guess he's like, well, since the world is basically ended anyways, I might as well just go and see a flick, you know? I might as well just go and see a movie. And what better movie to go on and see but In the Mouth of Madness? So Trent goes on into this theater and is to go and get a big bowl of popcorn. And we, of course, have it where basically Trent is watching himself in this film, and we have it where Trent at some points is going on and laughing and whatever. And so really all of a sudden this movie just kind of ends with Trent going on and just watching himself in this movie, and that's just how things fizzle out. I'm like, wait a minute, so there's not like a definitive thing of this movie? I guess. But anyways, so with that said, I think that technically does cover this film, because at the end of the day, I think it's time for me to say I'm going to get out of here. And plus, I've also spent way too much time talking about this movie, because I think this movie's an hour and a half anyways. So with that said, I think it's my time for me to get out of here. Hopefully I covered every bit of this film, because I'm sure there's probably something where I didn't cover perfectly, or there's some stuff that I did get confused about. But at least I tried to do the best I could to cover this movie. So at the end of the day, I could say that, hey, things won't be perfect, but also this is always going to be a one-off experience, especially if there is to be sequels and whatever, and I'll just go on and have like a rebuttal or something if there's ever a sequel. But I don't know. When looking at this, I think I did as well as I could possibly do, considering there are scenes that at some points do repeat themselves, and that's when always I get confused about a film whenever I try to break it down. So, with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy. Oh, there was the one scene where we go on and we have supposedly Styles in this one, like, I think bathroom, and she has all of a sudden all these, like, weird looking, like, tentacles coming from the bottom of the door. And all of a sudden, like, when Trent is going and talking to Styles, all of a sudden, like, the tentacle things just kind of go back in, and then Styles looks like normal Styles again. It's kind of interesting. But anyways, so, bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.